Windows Phone Central podcast 149 for September 19th, 2012. Howdy folks, Dan Rubino here, joined with Jay Bennett for, well, what's normally technically a normal podcast time, but today we're focusing strictly on HTC.
It's another special, really. I mean, it's quite exciting for us. 2 weeks ago to this day, we were talking Nokia and only Nokia. And today we get to talk HTC and only HTC. Well, that's not true. Of course, we're going to talk about other phones as well. But are you excited? Well, I'm genuinely excited about the fact we get to talk about HTC with some passion today. Right.
Yeah, it's let's just dive into it. So HTC had a big announcement. We've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now. The 8X.
We've been teasing it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. The big question, the weird thing about that whole rumor too, was that the fact it was going to be the HTC Cord and the HTC Rio, the lower end version, and so that's the 8X and the 8S, turned out to be 100% accurate. The one thing that didn't pan out was the HTC Zenith, which
so we should point that out. Some people were asking if the Accord was going to be a higher end one. We should point out the Accord is the 8X, and the 8S is, what was the other one? I've forgotten.
The Rio.
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah. So we do know they, as you say, that those phones are coordinating or matching to those code names. The Zenith, what was the Zenith supposed to be?
4.7-inch quad core. Now the quad core always threw it off a little bit, only because Qualcomm S4 chip, which is what it would have used, technically can do quad core, but it's called the S4 Pro. It's not even technically on the market yet. LG, in fact, this morning announced one of the first phones to support it, but that's coming. Now, in theory, I suppose HTC could have announced that, right? And said, same thing, right? It's coming, but they didn't. I don't know the reasons behind that. Maybe the Zenith never was. Maybe it was canceled. I don't know. It's really hard to say. Regardless, the Accord, aka the 8X, is considered to be their high-end phone, and that's what they're going with as far as their main flagship. For a lot of people, I think spec-wise, the phone is not very impressive, or it's good. It's really good. It's just not like the Lumia 920 status. Having said that, they're darn nice phones. And
are we talking about the 8X there? Sorry, I lost you a second.
Yes, the 8X.
Yeah.
And so.
Okay, so let's go over the 8X then, because obviously some people, I don't know why, but there's a small chance you listen to this podcast and you haven't seen the announcements and you haven't seen the HTC. So for those who haven't seen it, what are the headlines of the HTC 8X?
So it's a 4.3-inch with Super LCD 2 and Gorilla Glass 2. It has a special sort of...
and everyone knows that 2 makes it better, obviously.
Well, in theory, yeah, sure. And Gorilla Glass 2 is, basically more scratch resistant. So that's all good stuff. It has 1 gig of RAM, which is really good. 1.5 dual core CPU. That was actually a source of debate. At first it was a 1.2, but look, they bumped it to 1.5 recently.
Which is very good news.
Good. On the downside, it only has an 1800 milliamp battery versus the 2000 found in the Lumia 920 and the 2300 found in the TEV S. But at a 4.3-inch
so the physical
screen,
battery size is less.
Right, but the 4.3-inch screen, it should be, adequate. It also uses less power, so that might not make a major difference.
Well, that's exactly it. We can't quantify exactly what that means because a bigger battery does not always mean a bigger or longer battery life. What we need to see is have HTC kept the power management smart, have HTC come up with some kind of capability to turn off certain components. We just don't know until we get our hands on these devices how long they will last. I think it would sort of behoove HTC. They've always been relatively good with the batteries in their phones. I've always found that HTC have actually lasted much longer than Nokia's that I've known. So I wouldn't be too surprised if they squeeze a lot of life out of that battery. Let's also talk about,
by the way. So
let's just quickly talk about that display, because obviously, I mean, displays can win and lose devices at the moment, particularly because, as we all know, yes, you can design an awful lot around the phone, but the display is how you interact with the software that you care about. We're looking at, as we said, we're looking at a 4.3-inch touchscreen with the HD 720p resolution. Interesting to note that it is also the most pixels per inch, technically, of any of the Windows phones that are coming out, as far as I can tell. Obviously, that's because it's a 4.3-inch that's displaying all this 720 or 720p goodness. What we don't have is the kind of stuff, the pure motion that Nokia are bringing into their device, which is, where theoretically everything's locked to 60 hertz. It'll look very smooth. It'll look very quick. There'll be no lag or stutter. Exactly how much you're going to notice that, you're going to need to see the two devices side by side. I'd like to believe that Nokia have come up with some incredibly inventive way of dealing with sliding and dealing with motion on the screen, but I have a feeling that you won't really notice it in day-to-day use. What else have we talked about with this device? The camera. Now, you're the cameraman. Let's be honest. So, talk us through the HTC 8X's camera.
It's a really good camera. It's, once again, this is the only problem with the HTC devices. There's nothing in them technologically that pushes the boundaries forward. There's nothing new that was invented today, or nothing new that was shown off. That's not totally a bad thing. It's just that
we'll come to audio in a second, but I think they've done something potentially with audio.
Maybe the audio. But yeah, so with the camera, so we're looking at an 8 megapixel BSI sensor. So the BSI, once again, backside illuminator, you heard me talk about it. It's a world of difference, for improving low light functionality. It is essentially the same camera that's found in the 1X. The 1X happens to have a very good camera. So
and something which we should point out, HTC really did try and push with that whole falling skydiver advert, which was all around the camera.
Yeah,
so, they're confident in this camera.
Like the Titan 2, it has a dedicated image chip processor, which is cool. Yeah. I did use the camera. I tried it myself, and it is very fast. What I mean by fast, as soon as you take the photo, it just disappears off the screen. I mean, it is just instantly processed, basically. There's no waiting. It's
like having a burst mode, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's just it's going to make processing the images really, really quick. You're not going to wait for anything, no matter how big it is. We saw this on the Titan 2. The Titan 2 takes 16 megapixel photos, but you couldn't tell that it was doing that compared to, say, a 5 megapixel camera. And so the cameras are good. Also, more importantly, is perhaps the front-facing camera. I'll say, honestly, the HTC front-facing cameras were lacking the last round. They were pretty poor, whereas the 900 actually probably had one of the better front-facing cameras. Now HTC is addressing that. They made an f2.0. That's the low aperture, basically, for the front-facing camera. 2 megapixel camera that can do 1080p video. And more importantly, they made it an 88-degree viewing angle, meaning what they found, and they explained to me, was that they saw a lot of people using their front-facing camera, not so much for video chatting, which I think everybody wants, in theory, to use it for that, but what most people end up using it for is actually self-facing pictures when you're out with friends at a bar and stuff like that. So you hold up the phone and you can see what you're taking a picture of. So that's why they bumped up the specs for it, and that's how they geared that camera. So now it's wider, so it captures more of the background, which in theory, a lot of people will use a lot more and take advantage of.
So are we saying that in a way that front-facing camera is actually going to be in a way, it's going to be almost a decent quality shooter for the front of your phone, almost for the first time? Because if we're honest, that front shooter has always been kind of an add-on, a secondary lens, if you like, and it was always expected that you take your good pictures with the front. Are they saying that what we're trying to do here is give you an option that if you want to be able to see it as you're composing, to take self shots, we're actually going to give you perhaps the best camera that you could have for that on a smartphone? That's
what they're going for, and the image chip also uses that front-facing camera, meaning, once again, images should be rapid, and with that chip, it can do more advanced processing. Yeah, it's all connected.
So I didn't realize it used the image chip as well. That's interesting.
So, yeah, it's, will Nokia's 920 outdo it? Yeah, I think so, with optical image stabilization.
We'll come to that in a second, I think.
Yeah, but having said that, I think the camera on the 8X is really good. I mean, most people will be happy with it, so.
Okay. Actually, seeing as you brought it up, let's dive in just quickly to just looking at the camera and the camera only. HTC 8X versus the Nokia 920. It's not a fair comparison, but let's go. Obviously, we'll come to OIS in a second. Just going into the basics of it, the aperture on the HTC is it the same or a little bit higher, isn't it?
For the 8X, they're the same aperture. They're both at 2.0. The one on the 920 is slightly wider, 26 millimeter versus 28. That's not a real world difference. You wouldn't really notice that too much. It's just slightly wider on the 920.
We should also say it's got a single. The HTC has a single LED flash rather than the dual LED flash that the Nokia has.
Right. So if you use flash often, maybe that matters. I'm not a huge flash person, so I'm not sure that's a.
It does make a difference having the second LED, but neither are as good as having a proper flash, which for some reason no Windows phones have had since the HTC Mozart. Which is actually a very underrated phone.
Yeah, well, the Mozart is really good. So people will be pleased with the camera and the specs on this. Like I said, this phone isn't going to appeal to like the hardcore. We need quad core. We need all these specs. The 920 there, I think, really is unchallenged. But listen, I really like the 8X. Hopefully, you guys all saw my hands-on video with it. I was torn between the Limelight Yellow and California Blue colors. They're just they pop so much. They're the kind of phones that where you want to use them in public, and people are going to be like, "What is that?" And it's really going to draw a lot of attention. And they feel great. They're super thin. They're curved. They fit in the hand nicely. They're very light. And that screen, how it rolls off the edges and there's no lip, they're just smooth designed devices. They're just really sexy looking. Who knew HTC could actually become stylish? And so they did.
You're absolutely right.
So I think for a lot of people, this is going to be a big selling point. Not everybody likes the Lumia design.
Let's just quickly talk about the sound as well, just while we're on the sort of subject of listing out specs. The 8X, of course, also has this the Beats Audio. Whatever you feel about Beats Audio, and honestly, there are a lot of studies out there which suggest that really it doesn't do an awful lot. When you pair it with Beats headphones, you do get a difference in sound quality. I'm not going to say whether or not it's better or worse, especially for the money which you spend on it. My personal opinion, no. The thing which it does do, of course, it has the built-in amplifiers, which I find really interesting, because it means that people like me who actually do tend to plug their phones into sort of stereos and into other systems and use it as your music device, that's actually a big plus, because even cranking the Lumia 100 up to 30 isn't that loud, and it doesn't really get a very good signal through. So having a built-in amplifier in there, I can't remember the details of the amplifier. I think you shared them with me when we spoke earlier this week, but it does look like that could be a genuine selling point, and I hope that doesn't get lost in the whole Beats Audio marketing thing. I'd like to see them actually push this phone will sound great if you plug it into a standard dock.
I have after this podcast, if I get a chance, I do have a hands-on video with the amplifier being played through the speaker. Silly me, I end up talking throughout the video while this music is blaring. But you're going to but it's kind of funny because I'll actually be kind of drowned out by how loud and crisp and clear it is. So I'll try to get that video up for you guys to take a look. It's not 100% effective as a test, because obviously it's gone through video now. So you just have to kind of take my word. But the amplifier really boosts the volume for the output just to the speakers. The Beats Audio only works with headphones on, not necessarily Beats headphones, but any headphones. But when it gets pumped through the speaker, that's the amplifier going on. So it works for the phone just as the amplifier there, but also, of course, if you output anything through the headphone jack to an auxiliary system, it'll pump out enough juice that it can actually crank. And that is important. For some people, they are music people first. Of course, if you're a music person and you want this phone with Beats Audio, there's an Achilles heel, which is the 16 gigs of storage with no expandable memory.
The elephant in the room, if you will.
Yeah, so when I spoke to HTC about that, we brought this up before, their research says that people don't really use more than 16 gigs. And so I know there are people in the room right now who are going to be like, I use 32 and I wish I had 64. But the market seems to be suggesting that you're in the minority, and they have to keep these phones, their costs at a certain price point. Now, perhaps adding a micro SD would have been a solution to that. So the TVS is advertising itself as being able to support up to 64 gigs with the ability of addition of micro SD. I don't know why they didn't do that with the 8X. I think that is sort of a downer. But like I said, if this phone is geared towards the middle of the road person, the non-enthusiasts, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it'll be okay.
I wouldn't say it's not going to appeal to enthusiasts. It's certainly not geared towards them, but there are sort of areas where people who are enthusiastic might still look at this with preference around the form factor and the fact that it looks like it's maybe slightly more ergonomic design with regard compared to sort of the beast that appears to be the Lumia 920. So let's just talk about storage for a second, because we need to address this head on, because storage is becoming quite an increasing subject around here at Windows Phone Central. I started my Windows Phone life with an 8 gig device, and that was definitely too short. There's no doubt about that. I was struggling. I filled it up, and I found that I was having to manage the device all the time. It was a pain. I switched to the Lumia 800, of course, which has 16 gig. And I can see why the research would suggest that people don't tend to use that much, because I've got all the music I want on here. I don't have all my music on here. I've got all the music I want. I can carry on doing everything else. But I do start to fill it up with apps and games. But then again, I'm a power user when it comes to downloading apps and doing various other stuff.
Sure. When
it comes to the research they've currently done, I would question the quality of that research, particularly around the fact that things are going to change with Windows Phone 8. That high-def screen alone will change how much storage people use. Not only because people will be using potentially 1080p, and they're offering 1080p video recording. Not only because people will be recording in those things, not only because they'll be taking 8 megapixel cameras, but also just because people who are using graphics in apps are going to need to start, providing you with high definition graphics. And it's surprising, it adds up very quickly if you've got to start using HD quality images, even in certain areas. In certain areas of the app. I mean, our app barely uses images at all. It just uses them on those tiles. But we're going to have to upscale those just to make sure that they look right. And little things do creep up. And you are going to start now hitting the limit of 16. I still think 16 is enough for, I would expect, more like 50% of users. But HTC's research there was a little bit short-sighted, with considering that they are moving to a new operating system. I hope I'm proven wrong.
Possibly. I would say, Android has the same issues, and variables, and that's what they do too. So,
I think people would
this
actually
isn't a
find
new problem, So, I mean, Android, like I said, the One X has this problem too, and I believe the One X has 16 gigs. So, it's pretty similar. This has been sort of the MO of HTC lately. Less focus on micro SD cards, and more focus on unibody designs and everything. So,
but I tell you what's surprising for me is that they haven't offered it in 2 size options, because even the Omnia 7 that I had technically did come in an 8 gig and a 16 gig. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I mean, that design is thin. They've really carefully arranged these components. But I would be curious to know what would happen. Why they can't make a 32 gigabyte option.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, like I said, I think it's probably price. I should talk about the design a little bit. They did give me a little behind the scenes of how they did this with the 8X. One of the things they did was they buried the battery really deep into the device, and they put the electronics on top of the battery for once. This allowed them to sort of like a sandwich, where you put the thickest part of the battery right dead in the center, right below the screen, right below the electronics, and then electronics can go on top, and they can kind of have a little more flexibility. That's what gives the back the nice rounded curve, and it's super thin and light. And I will say, the 920 is a heavy phone. It's comparatively heavy, I should say. When you actually hold it, it doesn't feel much heavier than the 900. And I would say the 900 feels solid. It is heavy, but what that actually means in real life terms is relative. I mean, you can just point to a number and say, yes, 920 is heavier, but what does that actually mean? It sounds more than it is.
Does it feel like in a way HTC and Nokia have just kind of switched places for this generation? Because obviously it used to be that the Titan 2 was sort of your no compromise, awesome phone, and you pick up a Lumia if you liked the design or trying to be a bit more careful about where you spend your money.
Well,
now it's kind of a case that the 920 is going to appeal to everybody who wants the enthusiast no compromise phone, and people who are sort of saying, okay, well, this is what I need, this is what I don't need, and this is what I can afford to spend, are probably going to be very tempted by just how great these devices look. HTC.
The 920 is safe as far as I'm concerned. There's no threat to it. It's going to appeal to that crowd, the high-end ultimate Windows Phone. What Nokia should be concerned with is their 820, because the 8X now undercuts the 820.
Yes.
And I still think the 8X will cost more than the 820 will, but the reasons to get the 820 are somewhat diminished. There's still some cool stuff.
There's
the 820
NFC.
You could still use the gloves on the screen.
Charging.
You can use NFC. It still has their camera technology involved. So there's still reasons for it. But the 8X, I think, at a 4.3-inch screen is ideal for a lot of people who don't necessarily want a big device. Now, we can talk about the 8S.
Yes.
8S is even lower.
My new favorite thing ever.
8S
I'm
is
in
a
love
great
with
phone.
an inanimate object. It's
one of the big disappointments with it is it's only 4 inches, but it's 800 by 480. Now, I will say my real life experience so far looking at these, it's really hard to tell initially, 840 by 720p. I'm sure it'll matter when it comes to looking at photos, looking at the web and text. But when you just look at the start screen, it is not a world of difference. In fact, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. That may be disappointing for some people, but it's true. It's always been kind of argument
screen,
that Windows Phone always looks good at 800 by 480 anyway. Now, the downside of the 8S is the 5 megapixel camera is front side illuminated. That bothers me only because the radar is sort of a mid-range phone, 5 megapixel camera too, but that's BSI sensor. So they really cut back on that phone's camera, and it works well. I took photos of it; it looked great, but had it been BSI, it would have been better. And so the specs on that one are much lower. It only comes with 4 gigs of storage, but it has a micro SD.
So it's 4 gigs of storage. This is again going to be interesting as well because people are looking at 4 gigs of storage. It'll be interesting to see what that actually ends up being if it's more like 3.6. But that is what you're going to get for just your apps and your personal data. We know that Windows Phone 8, in terms of what micro SD can do, is photos, and video, and music. So what you use the bulk of your memory for, but you cannot install apps to the micro SD card and games. That could be a problem. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Clearly, this is about. Yeah, I was going to say this is about price point. This was about really, that phone should be about $50 in contract. That's what I'm guessing.
But here's my concern, Dan, like this is a real concern. HTC have basically diluted their brand and diluted what the quality of the stuff that they put out from Android by making these low-end, low-memory devices. We've seen it with the HTC Wildfire. We've seen it with the HTC Cha-Cha. There's 2 phones there which had very, very tiny internal memory when you couldn't necessarily install the right apps on Android to micro SD cards. And people got in a state where these phones filled up in memory and they can't use them. I have a flatmate who has the Cha-Cha and she cannot receive email because there's not enough spare storage on the sort of 750 something meg that she gets. And that paints a bad image of the HTC brand. It's part of what's got them in trouble recently. And it also paints a bad image of the Android system because she's now thinking, I'm done with Android. I want to move to something simple. Windows Phone used to be able to claim that, but with this segregation of memory, we're going to start seeing that problem of, I can't install apps on my micro SD card. Now, at 4 gig, that should be okay, but I'm concerned that HTC are starting down this slippery slope again.
It'll be an interesting experiment to see what happens with it, that's for sure. Obviously, they've probably thought about this. I should point out HTC has said in the past that they're getting away from the high-end premium phones because simply put, the margins there aren't winning for them. So although everybody wants these super flagship 4.8 inch, 20 gigs of, storage or whatever, 30 megapixel camera, all the bells and whistles you can think of, at the end of the day, that doesn't push the market for them. And I know it's counterintuitive, but people have to remember that most people don't think about their smartphones all that often. And so we may be focusing a lot on specs, but your average person just wants to have some songs with them and some video and stuff, but they don't really put a lot of emphasis on specs. So HTC is clearly choosing a path here for a specific reason, and we'll just have to see if it works out for them.
So let's talk about the design of the 8S then, because I mean, it's the headline for me. I mean, that device is utterly beautiful. I mean, I know that that's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some people will disagree with me here. But the dual color, having the bottom with the capacitive buttons as sort of one color, particularly the domino black and white look, it's a unique design. It doesn't just take a copy of what other people have done. I say unique, sorry. People will say that the Xperia has that kind of idea. It's different enough, I would say. I think it looks beautiful. I think it's really outspoken. I like the fact that HTC's design guys have basically said, what can we do within the limited space of what you can design on these black slabs, as it could be, to make them not black slabs? Not everyone's going to agree with me. And people in our chat room, some people are saying, no, I disagree, it looks cheesy. I think that there's something to be said about cheesiness with some of the colors. I'd say that the black and white and the red designs and the blue designs don't look cheesy. And they look beautiful. But, that's down to each individual. It's almost enough to make me want to buy one, just because I like the design that much.
The colors are great. I kind of almost wish the two-tone colors were available on the 8X series. The 8X series is almost a little. I love the colors, and I'm definitely going to get one. But I kind of almost wish it had the two-tone effect that the 8S has, because some of those colors. I really like the gray limelight. Yellow looks really great, and the black with the white, the domino they call, is pretty cool looking. So they're great design phones. And I think for regular people looking to pick up a device who aren't spec crazy, will be very happy with it. And like I said, even though some of the specs here look lower than, we're talking about a 1 gigahertz dual core CPU, even though some of these specs may be similar to what we have now, they are a next generation of them, and they'll look a lot better. So I think most people will be happy with the offerings.
Actually, a question, I don't know if you know about this, but the RAM difference here is actually is quite staggeringly different. Yeah, 512 compared to the gig that they're putting on the higher end device. Are you aware of limitations that we placed similar to how we had with Tango? Obviously, that was half the size of normal RAM, which is the 256, and that meant that app developers couldn't do as much certain things. Are we looking at a low-end OS device as well? We don't really know how Windows Phone 8 is going to scale just yet.
We don't know, no. So there's nothing to say on that. We just don't know if that actually translates into a real-world experience difference. It's really hard to say at this point. Probably the other disappointing feature spec-wise, the Son already brought up, was the Bluetooth. It's Bluetooth 2.1. When I asked HTC this, they kind of gave me this non-answer answer. They're like, oh, Windows Phone doesn't really support. And I'm like, yeah, cool, okay. Of course it supports more than, the Lumia 920 comes with Windows Bluetooth 3.1. So the 2.1 thing is sort of a, that was kind of a cop-out excuse I got. But clearly, once again, they're saving costs here. We should also point out the 8X has NFC. I don't believe the 8S does. So that's another thing that was cut out.
Yes, you're correct.
So that's an important distinction for some.
Sorry, I should pick up something. Victor Schnee in our chat room has pointed out that the higher RAM, the 1 gig versus 512, probably relates to the fact that one's a 720p screen and one's a 800 by 480. Obviously, that's less required. So hopefully. Yeah, that does potentially line up. It'll be interesting when we hear more at Build, hopefully. But that is a very good point.
I think the Lumia 9 and the 820 is the same thing. So.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Sorry, excuse my cough. Overall though, that's still a device that I would, suggest for most people who aren't going to care too much about, let's say, the camera. And this one doesn't. Again, the 8S doesn't have the built-in audio amplifier either, does it?
No, the 8S does not. It has audio software for when you use headphones, but no amplifier. So they cut that out too. The 8X is sort of really where everything cool is at, and the 8S is just your normal run-the-mill kind of low-end phone that looks really good. Yeah. So as someone's complaining in the chat room that there's no white for the 8X. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting choice, I suppose. Surprisingly, they didn't do an all-white phone. But for me, that's more than offset by the fact that they offered that blue and that yellow-green color. So I think those are really just outstanding.
Yeah, speaking of the colors, what's the finish like on them? Are we looking? The Lumia 920 seems really glossy. I know that it works with the sort of 900 and the white, but I quite like
glossy,
my
but it's not. Well, it's not overstated. It's not slippery to hold by any means. The 920, it is glossy.
No,
but
it just looks that way, doesn't it?
Slick. It looks that way. So the 8X, they have it's a soft touch paint basically on them. They're really they feel tactile in your hand. They're not slippery. They're very light to begin with, but when you hold them, they feel just really kind of cool in your hand. They have, like I said, it's sort of like a soft touch paint on the back. So,
and the 8S was the same thing.
Yeah. It was a little bit more plastic, but because it has that bottom part which is plastic. So,
just going to pick up in our chat room, Ricky Adden saying, "Am I the only one who wishes that the 8S had the 8X as specs?" No, you're not. It's the first thing I said to Dan.
No, it definitely would have been cool. Yeah. It goes to show you, HTC at least can redesign things and, get it right. So the way they presented it, they were tasked by Microsoft to come out with something really unique and eye-catching, and that's what they came out with here today. So, I think they succeeded. And at least the feedback we've been getting from, our audience so far is that they're actually quite impressed with what HTC has done. So, that speaks volumes, I think.
I think you've raised this, you brought us nicely into the next thing I was going to talk about. Let's talk about what these announcements, what these new devices mean for Windows Phone 8 as the broader, as a broader platform. So there's two things really they've done. One, it's another option for Windows Phone 8 to be in the news, and the media coverage has actually been really surprising on the HTCs today because people seem to be quite interested in what HTC are doing. So that's good. But I think we could also talk about the fact that the bright color design, it's something which Nokia picked up on very quickly when they came into the Windows Phone arena. Do you think, in a way, the bright color design that HTC have adopted as well is actually going to start helping make more of a statement out of Windows Phone 8? Does it start to add to Microsoft's brand rather than just HTC's?
Oh, there's no doubt. These phones are going to look great on a store shelf. You're going to walk in and you're going to see these things and they're just going to pop out, along with the Lumia series too. Poor Samsung is going to be back in their 2010 with their gunmetal gray color. But I think HTC and Nokia have made phones look fun and fashionable again, and it's something that Android just doesn't really have. The One X looks, is nice with the white stuff, but it doesn't have that style that these phones do. So I think it's going to be very good for the brand as a whole. Like you said, the 8X is a real deal. I was really impressed by that phone, and I can't wait to get one myself. Doesn't mean I'm, putting the 920 to the side, because I think the 920 probably will be my main phone just because I'm a camera user. But I prefer the colors of the 8X over the 920's colors. I'm not a fan of red and yellow. I'll end up probably getting white, but I already have a white 900, so it feels kind of...
They need a cyan version.
Actually, I would have liked a green and blue version, like an indigo, would have been awesome. But these colors they went with are just too basic. They're the red and yellow is just a little too... So I'm not a big fan of the 920's colors at all. But no, these are great. This will boost the Windows Phone 8 brand. I think it definitely will. So
yeah, and perhaps more importantly is that it doesn't just boost the brand in terms of there's lots of great devices. It almost makes a statement of when you buy Windows Phone 8, you're buying something different, and it makes it really clear that you're buying something different and that's something that potentially is quite exciting. Microsoft now really have the hardware in place. They just need to knock it out of the park with the software and with the app support from developers. I think we are poised for... I know we've said this before on this podcast, particularly because obviously it matters to us that Windows Phone succeeds. It's time to kind of say we really are on the verge of Windows Phone's make or break moment. Windows Phone 8 and these devices, particularly around this holiday season, as you call it in America, we call it Christmas over here. It's now or never, and it's exciting.
Well, for the first time, we have compelling hardware. So, and compelling hardware is what the business
and
needed.
Compelling software with regards to what we can do with obviously those games. The fact that we're going to have the Havoc engine, other sort of things as well.
So it'll be good. Someone asked in the chat, I'm going to just admit that HTC copied Nokia. I wouldn't go that far. Fact is, I don't consider what HTC is doing is just giving what people in the market want rounded curved screens. That's just a given. I don't think it's a Nokia thing. I think Nokia, they did it with the 800 and wooed a lot of attention. Then they didn't do it with the 900. A lot of people have knocked it for it. Now they're bringing it back with the 920, but it's still not as curved as the 800, but the edges are nice. What they're doing here with the 8X, it's just what people want. So, and the technology's gotten there with the Gorilla Glass 2 and everything that makes the screens more resilient because the screen pops out now. In other words, if you put it face down, the screen is totally exposed on your surface.
But that's okay. I mean, I'd say I have that on mine, but the scratches that it's picked up on the Lumia 800 are pretty much nothing. I mean, it's the most durable device I've owned, without a doubt. So don't be scared by the fact that it's a curved glass, and the glass is obviously
well, the curved glass thing is a Gorilla Glass technology that has become more mainstream and less cost prohibitive to do. So I don't. Once again, that's not even a Nokia thing, right? They didn't invent that. That's Gorilla Glass. It's a Corning thing. They just happen to use it. That's not taking away from Nokia too much, but I don't think HTC's copying. Regarding the colors, are they copying Nokia? Probably a little bit. There, obviously, they see how popular the colors are for phones, but once again.
But in that case, Nokia copied Apple when it came to from the original Nano designs and iPod designs.
Right. Yeah, those all came.
Yes, it was an old thing.
Yeah.
Devices have come in colors for a while.
Yeah. So I don't really find it that big of a deal. Once again, they're just giving the market what they want, which is multiple colors and eye-catching.
Interesting
So
devices.
no, I don't really find. Yeah, so I don't really find them copying too much. They're just sort of responding to the market and better adapting, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Nokia will probably see it differently, though. I'm sure they will.
Well, let's talk about that quickly, because Nokia came out with an interesting statement today saying that some may choose to tactically rebrand hardware, whereas Nokia is looking at building a line with its Lumia devices.
Sure.
That was a very poorly worded statement, Nokia, considering the 920's design. You are tactically rebranding the 900 with some new internals, as far as I'm concerned. That's a dangerous statement to make.
Well, no, but Nokia has introduced new technology. They've actually done innovation. There's actual innovation there that's never been done before, and they could point to a few things.
But let's talk about the Lumia 800. What was that originally?
With the N9?
Yeah, exactly. It's a tactical rebranding of existing
hardware. Hell? Yeah, but what the hell's the N9? No one knows what the N9 is. You're a phone geek. Of course you know what the N9 is. Ask anyone on the street what the N9 is, and they're kind of like, what was that? Like if you ask that in New York City, they'd be like, that's the train, right? Yeah, you can catch that in 40 seconds. No one knows what the N9 is. So yeah, of course they recycled some of that design, but that's totally fair. That phone barely sold. No carriers really picked it up. It was on a dying platform. They kind of put it out there just to put it out there. So they did the PureView 808. But I mean, they had all the reason to recycle that because it never got a fair chance with the fair operating system in the market. So I'm totally okay with them doing the 800 and 900, keeping that design and evolving that. It is kind of new. I don't think they were talking so much about their design as being completely unique or different. But like I said, I think it's about the hardware innovation that they're bringing and pushing technology forward. It's the same argument I made with the iPhone 5. iPhone 5 is a great device. It's going to sell very well, but the Lumia 920 actually introduced new technology that no one else had, and that's an important distinction. Doesn't mean it's a better phone, not necessarily. Does it mean that Nokia's got a lot of tricks up their sleeve and their research and development and patent firm is, strong? Yes, I think it does. So I think they're a little bit more interesting to watch.
So let's talk. I think actually that you bring us on nicely to. We are going to, let's talk. Our audience is interested in the 920 and the 8X, let's be honest. So let's talk about exactly what the differentiating factors are here. We're not going to keep score but we all know which phone is going to win this. But what does the 920 give you exactly that the 8X, doesn't? And what does the 8X give you that the Nokia and Lumia 920 doesn't? So let's start with do you want to take a device each?
I guess I don't know. Probably better just for different categories, but it's kind of a weird combo. Only because, like I said, some of these things will automatically be the deciding factor for people. Some people are just going to be like, "Listen, 920 is great. It's too big." End of story. I don't care what the rest of the specs are. It's too big. I don't want to carry this giant device.
But that's actually a really good point, and that's the one thing the 8X does bring to the table. It's great hardware. It's a good resolution screen. In fact, it's technically a better PPI screen. If we're going to get all Apple on it, it's more Retina than the Nokia 920 is. Let's look at it. As a device, it's going to be a smaller device. It's not going to be the bigger bulge in your pocket. And maybe you like a big bulge in your pocket. I prefer that my phone doesn't stick out too much. That is a really important point. Like the fact that the 8X is a smaller, thinner, lighter device, potentially with the same battery, should be considered a bonus. But let's talk about the gimmicks. So what gimmicks does the 920 bring that the 8X doesn't?
I guess you could. You see that word gimmick. That's sort of, I don't know. That's totally leading question.
I'm using it on purpose because we had you gave us this assignment obviously this week of what's your next Windows phone, and in my article I wrote that I am absolutely in love. As much as I'm in love with this design, I'm also still very much in love with wireless charging. Wireless charging is a gimmick. It's brilliant technology, but it's a gimmick that sells devices because it's like this feels like it's suddenly an evolution of the technology.
This is where I sort of disagree, I guess, with the expression gimmick, because gimmicks are things that don't solve actual world problems or problems that people have with devices.
How much of a problem is plugging in the device? I'm objectively asking that question because I think it's a huge problem in my life. I would like the wireless charging, but objectively.
Think of a world, though, where the Chai, whatever wireless standard is adopted throughout the industry. That's the pick. That's the goal you should be thinking of. That where you just walk into a coffee shop and there's just wireless charging pads everywhere, and they're just built in, sort of like a headphone, like 3.5 your headphone jack is built into certain seats and stuff like that. So where you just put any device, not just your phone, but any kind of electronic down on it, and just starts picking up a charge. That's the long-term goal of all this wireless charging. You can argue now it would just be around your home, by your bedside. Maybe if you fly, was it Atlantic or Virgin, whoever has that deal. In that sense, it's kind of gimmicky, but you have to really think of sort of the long term, what this actually means for the industry, kind of. So that's the only reason I disagree, sort of, with calling it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I didn't say that's exactly the point. But I mean, I'm going to rephrase my word gimmick.
3D is a gimmick.
Okay,
because it doesn't solve a real world problem, right? There's no actual. It enhances sort of the visual experience, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
But it doesn't actually solve an issue. It doesn't to make your life easier.
Doesn't key or Qi charging improve on an existing problem where micro USB standardized charging ports was supposed to solve the problem?
Like I said, it's about making your life easier. And so I think the technology with Qi is doing that. It might not happen for a while, but that is sort of, the intent behind it, that you don't have all these wires and everything kind of hidden behind it. And you can just presumably start making, larger devices, like even furniture with this stuff built into it, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine about a countertop that had a wireless charge. I mean, like we saw it at... in New York, they just had these wooden tables. They were just flat wooden tables. They look like just normal. But they had the wireless charging pad below the table. And then on top of the table, and you can see it, it's in the yellow 920 photo I use on the site a lot. And they just painted there was actually little stickers, little graphics of where the charging pad was. It just has markers. And you put your phone there, it would charge. If you moved it over a couple of inches, it wouldn't. So you can actually just have hardwood furniture with this stuff kind of built into it, and you wouldn't even know. It would just be one specific area. I don't know. That's all I'm trying to say, that this actually is sort of...
No, I agree with you. The vision is fantastic. As it is now...
For practical, sure. Okay, it's a little gimmicky. Yeah.
Yeah. But then again, I also do love the NFC to tag it on a device and then putting it down to charge on said device instead of docks. Especially seeing as people are going to be looking for the next big thing, docks, now that Apple have killed off their 30-pin connector. So headline, where do we get to? We got to the HTC has a thinner device. The HTC is also, we're talking about thinner in ergonomics, because it's a taller, thinner device. Unfortunately, Apple are right here in that it will, a thinner, taller device will be easier to operate with one hand than a large, wide device. I'm sorry, that's just true. As much as I don't agree with necessarily the 4-inch design that they came up with, it is a matter of fact, it is true. The Lumia 920, we're saying, obviously has the wireless charging feature. It also has OIS. OIS at the moment we've seen good results on it, but have we necessarily seen those good results outside of a controlled environment? I don't think we have. I think it'll be good to see the kind of pictures we actually do get from it, and I can't wait.
OIS is a proven technology. It's the news here is
not this small.
Well, that's the news here, right? That they made it small enough to go into a phone. But the theory behind it is huge. I just bought a brand new video camera that has OIS in it, and it's night and day between the stabilization of it. I'm 100% convinced that it's going to matter. Real world differences for photo taking with people. But yeah.
Okay, good. So we'll go with that one. And what are the other things I'm missing something? Oh yeah, the super sensitive screen technology and pure motion HD, as they're called, or whatever they want to call it. So there's a potentially smoother screen. Again, we don't know how much that's going to affect it. We need to see the phones side by side, and the ability to use them with gloves on. But that is what Nokia is doing differently, as we say. Oh, sorry, in 32 gig. I almost forgot. It is a flagship device that Nokia have produced. HTC have produced what I would call a conservative flagship device. Oh, sorry. Atmar in our chat room saying I'm forgetting PureView sound. I don't remember anything about PureView sound. Was there anything in the 920, the Nokia Lumia 920 that
I don't remember specifically, but they have some sort of Dolby thing.
do they?
Supposed to help improve this. So yeah.
I've just got bowled over with everything else that I obviously missed that. But let's talk about So the last thing, that's our hardware out of the way. Let's talk about software. We have obviously Nokia's capability of Nokia's exclusive apps that they're providing, and then we have HTC's exclusivity and exclusive apps they're providing. Now, HTC used to be quite a differentiator when it came to software because they had quite a lot of apps that they put out there, including the attentive phone stuff, turning over your phone to silence it. Nokia have come out with Nokia Music, which is obviously great. Nokia Drive, which we should say Nokia Drive will be on the HTCs as well. If you're looking for the GPS solution, that will be on the HTC devices and the Samsung devices. It's coming to all Windows Phone 8 devices. Nokia Maps, which the bulk of which is going to go into Bing Maps, so that's kind of discounted. So that, apart from that music service, which is great for streaming, but not great for downloading things in some ways, what else? People are saying just Nokia Maps, not Drive. No, Nokia Drive is coming to all Windows Phone 8 devices. Nokia Drive is coming to all Windows Phone 8 devices. Nokia, no, it's not. Okay, I'll go find the blog post.
No, it is. It is. He's not lying.
It really is, guys. I'm not lying. It's not coming to Windows Phone 7 devices, but it is coming to all Windows Phone 8 devices. Nokia Drive will not be a Windows Phone 8 exclusive app to Nokia. That was part of the licensing deal with Microsoft. Jesus. Yeah. I promise. I absolutely promise you.
I at least provided a link. Yeah, so there we go.
Yeah. So camera lenses is also part. What are the software have we got? Take over.
Well, so yeah, you have the Nokia lenses, which is they bought that company Scalato, who's making all sorts of cool camera apps, and so you're going to see a lot of that innovation there. The fact is, whatever Nokia has now and is going to be continue with Windows Phone 8, so you can continue to expect them to have more exclusive software, exclusive lens apps, and all sorts of things. That's the ecosystem. For some people, it doesn't matter. For a lot of people, it does matter. And that's somewhere I think HTC will clearly lag behind, I should say, Nokia. Whether that matters to you or not, I think for the casual user, and maybe not a big deal, but for our audience, it sort of will matter. Having said that, I don't know how much Nokia exclusive software I actually use on a daily basis. The Drive is cool, but I don't use it very often. And some of the other apps, like Nokia Trailers, I think is great. I actually don't use it very often, though. So it's a question about whether or not you actually use these things. But it is an important differentiator for Nokia. Like I said, at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to what you see in the store and what you feel. It's going to come down to price and how you feel when you hold the phones. I really think some people...
Sorry, Karen.
No, I was just going to say, it's just going to matter when you pick it up. You're going to just be like, this is it. This is what I want. I like this color. And that's it. I think if you get the 8X, you'll be fine with that. If you're a person who needs a ton of music, the 32 gig for the 920 is going to matter. If you're a photo person, 920 will matter. If you need smaller, so these things really come down to, I see it all the time in forums. People are just like, I need this, and then that's it. And that's the deciding factor. So I think they'll have a good choice. Yeah. So, I mean, we can compare the specs all we want, but, there's pros and cons to everything. So
absolutely, I think when it comes to services, I mean, Nokia are going to have some great location services, but obviously location services are being brought around. What I'll be curious to see is how much more of this kind of thing we see, because I'm holding up in front of me, for those who don't have video, Mirror's Edge, which of course was a Nokia only release, and actually represents what I would say is Nokia's real ace in the hole, and that is that there are third parties, as Daniel said, that will come to Nokia first, because Nokia are providing them with the funding, the resources, whatever, to actually port the devices, the apps over. And I'll be honest, I played Mirror's Edge all the way through. I thought it was a brilliant game. I know it's an old iPhone port, but it doesn't matter. I really enjoyed it.
Right.
And for that kind of instance, Nokia does have a definite leg up, and that's, I mean, it won't last forever. You'll perhaps see 6 months of exclusivity, but 6 months is a long time in a 2-year phone contract. That is where Nokia, I think, still will distinguish themselves. Their own apps are great, but they're not killer for me. Some things they're bringing over, things like Draw Something, Angry Bird Space, those are killer apps. We will not admit it are not. For a lot of people, that's a killer experience. And that is where Nokia still has a differentiating factor.
Yeah. Well, let's bring this to a close here. We're almost at an hour, and I just want to kind of wrap it up because I don't want to spend too much time talking about all this stuff. But in the end of the day, I think we could summarize this. HTC came out. They didn't, surprise the world with some super high-end, technology evolving device. What they did show was that, one, that the company can clearly innovate in terms of design and make things really interesting again. And that the two phones that they did show off turned enough heads for people. Our audience, we've done a couple polls on the site if you want to go take them, have been pretty impressed with their offerings. It doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily buy those phones or they're 100% sold on them, but they're not disappointed. And I see much more enthusiasm for HTC's new devices than, say, Samsung's Ativ S, which I'm sure is a fine phone. I don't want to knock it. It's just not as wow, but these phones are kind of wow.
The RTVS is, you bring that up, it's interesting. It's obviously not as wow in terms of design, but in terms of specs, it probably is in a way that we've thrown the kitchen sink at it phone. So people should probably people should be looking at that. If specs, if you really want your specs, it's probably a phone to look at.
But could you imagine if Samsung had decided to make different colored versions of the TVS? It would have looked so much nicer, They blew an opportunity to really wow people and said they have a phone that's actually solid and will probably work really well. And I'm sure when I hold it, be like, oh, this is nice, but it is not something to talk about. I'm telling you, when you see someone with the Limelight Yellow 8X in their hand, it's going to stick out. And you're like, oh, that's so cool. What is that? And that's what Windows Phone 8 needs. That's what HTC needs. It works for everybody. The TVS looks just like any other phone out there. And that's sort of that's going to hurt Samsung. So I'm excited about HTC. I think they did a good job today. The presentation was, some people rated it a little harsh. The speakers weren't that good. They maybe even Nokia might have outdone them as far as, presentations are difficult. They end up getting a lot of their executives and stuff on stage. And so it's not as exciting. But, HTC did good, or did well, I should say. I hate saying did good. But
as people keep telling us all our grammar's wrong.
Yeah. So let's quickly take some questions here in the room, unless you have something to add to that.
No, I think that's good. So people from the chat, I think you summed up perfectly. People from the chat room, we're not going to do comments from last week. We will do that on our next podcast. We'll sum up lots of comments next podcast, I promise. But people from the chat room, if there's any questions you wanted to ask us, now is the time. We're going to pick a few. One of the interesting points just being brought up by Alan CM, saying that the Lumia 920 doesn't have an FM radio. Is that true?
I don't think that's... No, I think it does. I think that's standard with Windows phones. When you plug in the headphone jack, it works. I know the 8X has it too. I'll double check on it. I've been meaning to follow up with a couple people who has that question. But I'm pretty sure that's sort of a standard Windows thing. Regardless, I've actually never absolutely used that once. I know there are people that do, though, so I know that's an important feature for some. So we'll tell you, get confirmation for that.
Cool. Another question here from, who was it? There we go. Oh God, I'm going to struggle with this one. Ume Risufi, I hope that's roughly right. Do you think Samsung will try to expand its exclusive selection? Presumably he means software. There. Yeah.
No.
I
doubt it.
Unfortunately, honestly, you're right. They didn't do much with Windows Phone 7. They won't keep going.
Even when they did do exclusive stuff, it wasn't that exciting. And so I just don't see any enthusiasm behind them for Windows Phone right now. They may say otherwise, but this is a pretty lackluster approach by Samsung. Now, HTC will be interesting to watch if they're actually going to do something more with their software. I sure hope so. I think you'd be naive to look at what Nokia is doing and be like, yeah, we don't need to do that either. So that'll be really interesting to watch. But Nokia will be the top one for that area.
Seglapur just says, woohoo, I can see you guys for the first time. You're much younger than I thought from the podcast. And we should say that Daniel's actually much older than he looks. He just has a bit of a routine when it comes to his morning.
Yes.
Right. This is obviously what happens when he goes and has a HTC day. People are asking, particularly Joko Bogdanovic is asking, how is the OS? We don't know. We still haven't seen much of the OS, my understanding. Hopefully we'll know something more about it very, very soon.
I mean, I did get to play with a tad, as you saw in the video, but I still had minders and agreed upon what not do. It felt fast to me.
Much past the start screen, or was it all just the start screen?
No, it's pretty much just start screen. They didn't really want me scrolling over to the programs, which I accidentally did in the video once, but because it's a sensitive screen. It's hard to say. It feels like Windows. That's a weird thing about Windows Phone 8 is it feels just like Windows Phone 7. It's not going to feel radically different. It's the internal stuff that's underneath and the new features you'll be able to do. But for the most part, it kind of feels already what you're using. It's just a little bit better. So,
This improves. Awesome John has asked me, what phone have I decided on? Obviously referring to our which Windows Phone is next. I haven't. I still haven't. it will depend. I think a big deciding factor for me now will be if the UK gets a 4G Windows Phone and which phone that will be. I'm still very attracted to the Lumia 920's wireless charging, but at the same time, I really like the design and the thinness and the sort of style of the 8X. So it'll be difficult. I will really not be sure. We'll wait and see. I'll put them side by side. Another good question. There was a question that I just saw. People asking, is Skype finally integrated with Windows Phone 8? Yes, it is. That was easy. Does the 8X have the soft feel like the Lumia 710? Yes, it does. What else have we got? Can you see any that you want to pick up?
I have not. I haven't been looking.
Well, what additional announcements from Microsoft about the OS do we expect or hope for?
That's a tough question. So, I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on here with Microsoft, and we don't really know. So, as you know, we ran that story, I believe it was yesterday, about the Lumia 920 supposedly popping up on AT&T on October 21st. Since I posted that follow-up with a news source who I trust very much, I actually had someone else contact us also backing that up from a different angle. And so that raises all sorts of weird questions. That's the actual October 21st is reportedly the actual sale date, not the pre-order. We're hedging with the pre-order. Maybe it's just that, but I keep hearing that's the actual sale date. It's weird, but in a way it makes sense since everybody's going, you got to get these phones out, the iPhone 5, the iPhone 5. And so I think Microsoft and let's get it up there. And, the OS RTM, so in theory they can do that. What makes it weird is it's going to predate what's supposedly the Microsoft announcement for Windows Phone 8, which is supposedly October 29th. Does that actually mean anything? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they'd rather just get the phone out there, just be here it is. You can go down to the store and pick it up right now. I think that would make a pretty compelling, presentation as well. What are we expecting for Windows Phone 8 that we haven't seen? That's a good question, and something tells me there are some hidden things there that Microsoft just doesn't want us to see.
Stuff they still haven't technically announced yet as well that we do.
Yeah, and so is that 80-20? 80% we've seen, 20% we haven't. Is it 95? I honestly don't know. I'm not being coy here. I honestly don't have any insight. Whatever I post on the site, you guys have read, is kind of where I'm at. If I find out more, I'll certainly pass it. But that's sort of the big question right now. Is Windows Phone 8 more than what we're so far expected to believe? I don't know.
We don't know. So the last question that I'm going to pick up, which comes from JNBS21, which runs off nicely, of course. We've just had all of our which Windows Phone is my next posts. Dan, are you working on one, or do you want to do yours now? Yeah,
I'll probably do it for tomorrow or Friday, whenever I recuperate from this last 24 hours.
Okay, so we can expect to hear exactly which phone Dan you'll be going for. And by the way, you're not allowed to cop out in that article and just say, "Oh, I'm going to get all of them because it's my job."
All of them?
No, we want to know which one you would get.
I will. I mean, this is actually my real goal, if you want to know right now. 8X on T-Mobile, 920 on AT&T. That is actually my intent right now to have. So, in case, which one I'd actually prefer, well, you could tune in, and I'll explain why. But it's a tough choice. Everybody knows I love the Titan 2, and I like HTC for a reason. So,
Well, we will find out, and perhaps if you can get a confirmation on that FM radio, because it seems to be quite a hot topic in our chat room. That might be a bit of a swinging point for a lot of people.
Sure.
Good stuff. Do you want to take it away?
Okay. Sounds very good. Well, I don't have the outro for our podcast today, but that's okay.
Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, you can find us all on Twitter at WP Central. You can find Dan at Daniel_Rubino. George, our reviews editor, is at Coppertop004. Rich, one of our British writers, is at Rich Edmonds. Myself, I'm at JAYT Bennett. That's Bennett with 2 N's and 2 T's, not with just 1 T, as people keep saying. Paul, our games editor, is at SegaCon. You can find Raphael when he's not in. Where is he today?
He's flying to Seattle.
Okay, he's got a good excuse. He's at Within Raphael. You can find Matt at Rogue Code. Dave, our forums guru, really, is at Big_D5. And at GroovePoint, you'll find Rob. This has been Mobile Nations podcast. Please go to mobilenations.com for more great shows covering everything mobile, or head over to the Windows Phone Central forums if you'd like to get involved in our community and discussing more about Windows Phone news, devices, and apps, of course, including these new awesome HTC devices. Thanks to the WP Central store for sponsoring the podcast, and thanks also to the great artists at ccmixer.org for offering us a great database of Creative Commons music. And you can find out more at the bottom of this post.
There you go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Renee, for producing our podcast again. He works tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure everything goes off without a hitch. And thank you, Jay, for joining us. And thanks for everybody. Send in your questions. We'll try to answer them. Renee will try to get this podcast up on the site within the next 12 hours or so, depending on how tired
he feels.
But there you go.
He has just written a big review, so we'll let him off if he takes a bit of time.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
so
I'm doing
there you
it
go.
now before I fall asleep.
Great. All right. Take care, everybody.